The ambient temperature inside the massive glass dome of the Municipal Botanical Conservatory was currently hovering at a stifling 82 degrees. It was a dense, humid climate specifically engineered to sustain rare tropical orchids, but it was profoundly uncomfortable for a man wearing a rented, ill-fitting formal tuxedo. The stagnant air smelled heavily of damp earth, blooming jasmine, and the heavy, expensive perfumes of the city's elite. I stood quietly near the decorative edge of the sprawling indoor koi pond, holding a small, ridiculously delicate porcelain cup of black coffee that I did not want. As a 32-year-old custom metal fabricator, my operational domain consists of heavy iron anvils, industrial plasma cutters, and liquid steel that burns bright white at 2,000 degrees. I do not belong at high society charity galas. I prefer the predictable, honest heat of the forge. I was only standing in this crowded room because my younger sister, Clara, had designed the elaborate, custom wrought iron lighting fixtures illuminating the primary stone walkways, and she had relentlessly begged me to attend the grand unveiling as her designated +1. I took a slow, deliberate step backward to allow a hurried waiter carrying a silver tray of crystal champagne flutes to pass safely on the narrow slate path. As my weight shifted, the stiff leather heel of my rented dress shoe caught the uneven, jagged edge of a decorative paving stone. I lost my physical balance for exactly a fraction of a second. In my line of work, a fraction of a second is enough to cause severe damage. My right arm jerked to compensate for the shift in gravity, and half of the hot, black coffee sloshed violently out of the fragile porcelain cup. It landed directly onto the back of the woman standing immediately to my left. The dark, scalding liquid instantly soaked into the pale, expensive silk of her elegant evening gown, blooming into a jagged, ugly stain. She gasped sharply, her spine snapping rigid as the sudden heat registered against her skin. She turned around with a rapid, defensive motion. Faith Martin was 37 years old. I recognized her immediately from the glossy, oversized promotional materials displayed near the main entrance of the building. She was the lead landscape architect who had conceptualized and designed the entire multi-million-dollar conservatory expansion we were currently standing inside. She looked fiercely intelligent, flawlessly polished, and entirely out of my social league. "I am incredibly sorry," I said immediately, my voice a deep, quiet rumble, completely devoid of defensive excuses or panicked apologies. I reached into my tuxedo pocket and pulled out a clean, folded white cotton handkerchief, offering it to her with a steady hand. That was my fault. I misjudged the elevation of the paving stone. Faith looked at the dark stain spreading rapidly across the delicate silk, then slowly looked up at my face. She did not yell. She did not cause a theatrical public scene. She simply took the handkerchief from my fingers. "It's fine," she said, dabbing at the fabric. Her voice was remarkably steady, maintaining a professional cadence, but I clearly noticed the subtle, frantic tension locking her jaw tight. She wasn't actually looking at the ruined dress. Her dark eyes were darting nervously over my right shoulder, rapidly scanning the dense crowd gathered near the heavy glass entrance doors. "I assure you, it is not fine," I corrected gently, maintaining a highly respectful physical distance so as not to crowd her. "The silk is permanently ruined. Please allow me to cover the financial cost of replacing the garment." "I said it's fine," she repeated, her voice dropping suddenly into a harsh, desperate whisper. She stepped a fraction of an inch closer to me, physically shrinking her profile as if trying to hide within my shadow. "Just stand here, please, just for 1 minute." I frowned slightly, the skin pulling tight across my forehead. A man was actively, aggressively pushing his way through the affluent crowd toward us. He wore a bespoke, tailored suit that likely cost more than my primary welding rig. He possessed the arrogant, unyielding posture of a man entirely accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, completely regardless of the obstacles in his path. I recognized the specific physical energy immediately. It was the frantic, controlling energy of a predator who believed he inherently owned the room. "Faith," the man called out, his voice smooth but carrying a dark, threatening undertone that cut through the polite chatter of the gala. "I've been looking for you all evening. You haven't been answering my calls." Faith stiffened completely, her breathing hitching. She turned her back entirely toward him, effectively using my broad-shouldered frame as a physical shield to block his direct line of sight. "Tell him I'm busy," she whispered frantically, her voice cracking with raw, unmitigated panic. "Tell him I'm with you. Please. I do not involve myself in civilian drama. I prefer the objective, predictable reality of cold steel and measurable heat, but I do not tolerate fear in my immediate presence. A request for a shield is not something a man with my physical capacity ignores. I turned my body slightly, squaring my heavy shoulders, completely blocking her from the approaching man. I slipped my hands casually into the pockets of my trousers, projecting an aura of absolute, immovable calm. I transformed myself into a structural wall. The man stopped exactly 2 feet away, looking up at me with overt, aggressive disdain. "Excuse me. I need to speak to my fiancé. She is currently engaged in a private conversation," I stated, my voice incredibly soft, a gentle knife sliding smoothly from a leather sheath. I did not raise my volume. I did not attempt to match his aggressive posturing or his entitled anger. I simply established a hard boundary. "I don't care," he sneered, attempting to step around my left side. "Faith, let's go. We need to discuss the municipal board vote right now." I shifted my stance a fraction of an inch, perfectly mirroring his movement, effectively cutting off his access path to her. I looked directly into his eyes, dropping the polite facade. "I believe she politely requested that you grant her some space," I noted, my tone remaining quiet, but carrying the heavy weight of a clear, undeniable warning. "It would be highly advisable to respect that request before the situation degrades." He stared at my chest. He looked at the thick, corded muscles in my neck and the heavy, burn-scarred calluses on my hands. He was a wealthy political operator, accustomed to intimidating people with money, status, and veiled threats. He suddenly realized he was standing in front of a man who cared about absolutely none of those things. He was trying to bend iron with his bare hands. "This isn't over, Faith," he hissed, his face flushing with angry public humiliation. He pointed a sharp, manicured finger at me. "And you have no idea who you are dealing with." "I am entirely unconcerned," I replied softly, refusing to blink. He glared at me for one long, heavily strained second before finally turning on his heel and retreating into the dense, milling crowd. The heavy, oppressive tension in the immediate area slowly dissipated. I remained perfectly still, holding the physical line until he was completely out of visual range and the threat was neutralized. I turned slowly back to Faith. She was leaning heavily against the cool stone railing of the koi pond, her eyes closed tight, her breathing shallow and erratic. "He's gone," I informed her quietly, keeping my hands visible. She opened her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The flawless professional armor she had worn all evening was entirely fractured, revealing the profound exhaustion beneath. "I am so incredibly sorry," she whispered, aggressively rubbing her left temple. "I shouldn't have dragged you into that. He's Vance, my ex-fiancé. We broke up over 6 months ago, but he absolutely refuses to accept it. He sits on the municipal planning board that directly controls the funding for this conservatory. He's been heavily threatening to kill my upcoming expansion contract if I don't take him back." I looked down at the dark, ruined stain on her expensive dress. I looked at the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion lining her face. "You did not drag me into anything," I corrected gently, keeping my hands resting near my pockets to ensure she felt safe in my proximity. "I spilled hot coffee on your dress. You requested a shield. I provided one." Faith looked up at me. She studied the rigid, calm lines of my face, searching for judgment. "You didn't even flinch. You just stood there and completely shut him down without raising your voice once." "I work with active fire and heavy iron for a living, Miss Martin," I replied, a faint, self-deprecating smile touching the corner of my mouth. "I do not find angry men in expensive suits particularly intimidating." She let out a short, surprised laugh, the sound genuine and incredibly pleasant in the stuffy room. "You look like you belong in an action movie, not a charity gala." "I assure you, I am not as fine as I look in this rented suit," I admitted, my voice dropping to a rougher, more honest register. "I am profoundly out of my element here. I prefer the dirt." "So am I," she confessed softly, stepping a fraction of an inch closer, the shared vulnerability bridging the massive gap between our entirely different worlds. We stood in the quiet corner of the Botanical Conservatory for 20 minutes, completely ignoring the loud, pretentious gala occurring around us. We didn't talk about Vance or his political leverage. We talked about the specific tensile strength of the wrought iron lighting fixtures my sister had fabricated. We talked about the complex root structures of the ancient oak trees she had meticulously preserved during the construction phase. We spoke the mutual, grounded language of craft and creation. At 2,100 hours, the event began to wind down. I escorted her safely through the lobby to the valet stand. "Thank you, Jian," she said, standing near the open door of her sleek sedan. "For the coffee and for the rescue. Send me the formal invoice for the dress," I insisted quietly, unwilling to let the debt linger. "I won't," she smiled, sliding into the driver's seat. I watched her red taillights disappear down the long, winding asphalt driveway. The brief connection felt cleanly concluded. I had stepped out of my isolated world for one night, and now I was securely returning to it. However, the perimeter was breached again less than 48 hours later. It was Monday afternoon. I was standing in the center of my forge, wearing a heavy, scorch-marked leather welding apron and a dark, heat-resistant respirator mask. The massive industrial bay doors were rolled wide open to properly vent the intense, suffocating heat of the shop. I was actively running a plasma cutter across a thick sheet of raw carbon steel, bright sparks showering across the concrete floor in a brilliant, violent cascade. I released the trigger on the heavy torch, the blinding blue arc snapping off instantly. I lifted my mask to inspect the precision of the cut. Faith was standing just inside the open bay doors. She looked entirely different than she had at the gala. She wore practical, dark work trousers and a simple white blouse. She looked incredibly tense, holding a thick, manila legal folder tightly against her chest like a physical barrier. I set the heavy plasma torch down on the steel workbench. I pulled off my thick leather gloves and walked slowly toward her. The air between us was thick, with the harsh smell of ozone and melted metal. "Miss Martin?" I said, my voice rough from inhaling the shop smoke. "This is a highly hazardous environment. You should not be standing near the active cutting bay without proper ocular safety equipment." "I'm sorry to interrupt your work, Jian," she said, her voice tight, completely ignoring my safety warning. She stepped fully into the shop, holding out a small, thick envelope. "I received this via certified municipal courier exactly 2 hours ago. It's a formal, legally binding invitation to an emergency municipal board hearing scheduled for this Friday." I did not take the envelope from her hands. I wiped my sweat-slicked forehead with the back of my bare arm. "I do not understand why you are bringing this to me. The hearing was called by Vance," she explained, her voice cracking slightly under the immense, crushing stress. "He officially filed a formal complaint claiming that my landscape architectural firm secured the initial conservatory contract through highly unethical bidding practices. He included a detailed, fabricated dossier of emails, supposedly written by me, offering financial kickbacks to the selection committee. It's a malicious lie. But the board has officially suspended my firm's operational license pending the outcome of the hearing." I frowned, a slow, dangerous movement of my brow. "He is utilizing his political leverage to actively destroy your professional reputation. If the board votes against me on Friday, I lose my firm. I lose everything I've built with my own hands for the last 10 years, she whispered, staring at the concrete floor. He sent me a private, encrypted text message right after the official notice arrived. He said if I agree to meet him for dinner and formally apologize, he will miraculously find a way to withdraw the complaint before the hearing. The sheer, calculated malice of the trap hit my chest with the physical density of an anvil. It was systemic extortion. "He set a trap," I noted, my jaw tightening as the cowardice of his tactic became glaringly apparent. "He cornered me," Faith confirmed, looking up at me with raw, desperate eyes. "I don't have the heavy political connections to fight him in that boardroom. I went to the local police, but they said without hard proof of the text message, it's just a civil contract dispute. I don't know what to do." She looked at my heavy, grease-stained hands. "You stopped him on Saturday. You didn't flinch. I know it's insane to ask a virtual stranger, but I need someone to stand next to me in that room on Friday. I need a physical shield. Will you come with me?" I stared at her in the sweltering heat of the forge. "I am a blacksmith. My mandate is to heat, bend, and shape raw iron into functional structures. I do not navigate complex municipal politics. Attending a highly publicized board hearing with a prominent architect was entirely outside my operational parameters. But I do not tolerate extortion, and I adamantly refuse to let a woman be hunted simply because a coward believes she is alone. You require a physical presence to completely neutralize his intimidation tactics during the hearing," I stated, my voice dropping its polite, distant cadence, shifting into a low, fiercely protective register. Faith's eyes widened slightly at the absolute certainty in my tone. "Yes. Can you do it?" I am not an attorney, I clarified gently, establishing the strict boundaries of my capability. I cannot argue the finer points of municipal contract law. I picked up the heavy plasma torch and locked it securely into its designated safety holster. However, I continued, looking directly into her eyes, locking my intent to hers. I am going to heat his story until it warps. We are going to make him swing first on the public record. What time is the hearing? For the next 4 days, my quiet, dust-filled forge was completely transformed into a strategic command center. I did not accept any new fabrication commissions. I placed a heavy, handwritten, closed sign on the exterior bay doors. Faith relocated her operational setup to the small, poorly lit office attached to my shop floor. We did not waste precious time discussing the emotional fallout of her broken engagement. We operated entirely within the realm of data, timelines, and verifiable documentation. Vance submitted the fabricated email dossier to the Municipal Ethics Committee on Monday morning. Faith noted, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard, referencing her massive digital archive. He officially claims the emails were sent from my secondary, private server during the initial bidding phase 2 years ago. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my chest, listening intently to the mechanics of the threat. Internal emails are incredibly difficult to quickly authenticate in a rapid hearing. He expects you to panic and defend yourself against the specific contents of the emails. We won't do that. We attack the structure of the documents themselves. I am a landscape architect. Gian. Faith smiled. A sharp, brilliant expression of pure competence that sent a strange, powerful spike of heat directly into my chest. I don't just draw pretty pictures of trees. I build complex, structural topographical maps. Every single digital file my firm generates, including my secure emails, runs through a specialized CAD routing system. It automatically embeds a complex, hidden metadata tag. It's a digital watermark designed specifically to prevent my proprietary designs from being stolen. If Vance fabricated those emails on a standard commercial word processor and exported them to PDF, they won't have the routing tag. That is your hammer, I instructed, stepping into the small office. You handle the digital forensics. I will handle the motive. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called my sister, Clara. I need you to pull the public procurement records for the secondary landscaping firm that bid against Faith 2 years ago. I want their corporate filings, their board of directors, and all available shell company ownership data. Faith looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. Why? Because men like Vance do not initiate a massive municipal scandal purely out of romantic spite, I explained, leaning over the dusty desk. They do it for profit. If you lose your operating license, your municipal contracts automatically default to the next approved bidder on the list. We need to find out exactly who benefits from your destruction. By 2300 hours on Thursday night, Clara successfully delivered the requested documents via secure courier. Faith slumped back heavily in her chair, meticulously reviewing the dense financial paperwork I laid out on the desk. The adrenaline that had sustained her for days crashed abruptly, leaving her depleted. He owns a 30% silent stake in the rival firm, she whispered, her voice cracking, her hands trembling slightly on the desk as she read the disclosure forms. It was never just about punishing me for leaving him. He's weaponizing the ethics committee to steal a $4 million contract. She looked out the small, dirty window at the dark industrial street. The raw vulnerability returned. I really thought I could save it, she whispered. It's my entire career. I let him into my life because I thought we were building a future together. I was so stupid to trust him. I did not offer a soft, generic platitude. I deal in structured defense and reality. You assumed mutual integrity? I stated, my voice a low, steady rumble in the quiet office, cutting sharply through her self-doubt. The failure of the system is his liability, not yours. She turned her head to look at me, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. You build things out of steel, Gian. You know how this world works. He has the political leverage. He has a fabricated claim, I corrected gently. I stood up from the doorframe. I walked around to her side of the desk. I did not ask for permission. I reached down and gently closed her laptop screen, physically severing her connection to the overwhelming stress. You have been fighting this battle continuously for 4 days, I noted, observing the deep exhaustion lined heavily around her eyes. You need to rest. I can't stop now, she argued weakly. You must, I commanded softly. I reached out. I placed my large, calloused hands firmly on her shoulders. The physical contact was sudden, but entirely non-aggressive. It was a physical anchor. I am unaccustomed to physical touch in my rigidly structured life, but the necessity of stabilizing her outweighed my own boundaries. Faith froze under my hands. Her breath hitched. She didn't pull away. I am the shield, I reminded her, my thumbs resting protectively against her collarbones. You provided the architecture. The burden of execution transfers to me. You are off the clock. She looked up into my face, searching the unyielding lines of my jaw for any sign of doubt. She found none. Okay, she breathed, the frantic fight draining out of her. She leaned back slightly, allowing my hands to bear a fraction of her physical weight. What do we do tomorrow? We test the structural integrity of his lies in front of witnesses, I promised, my voice a rough whisper. Go to sleep, Faith. Friday afternoon. 1,400 hours. I walked into the Municipal Civic Center. The massive building was imposing, lined with heavy marble columns designed to project authority. I wore a sharp, tailored dark suit. It was not a rental. It was tailored and precise. My posture was perfectly rigid. I found Faith standing in the quiet hallway outside the heavy mahogany doors of the primary hearing room. She looked pale, clutching her laptop tightly against her chest. The board isn't going to listen to me, Gian, she said, her voice tight as I approached. Vance has too many friends in that room. I stopped exactly 1 foot in front of her. I offered concrete power. You are going to walk into that room and demand a live review of the digital evidence? I stated, my voice a deep anchor. And what about the fabricated emails? She asked. You will dismantle the emails, I promised. I will dismantle the man. Are you ready? Faith took a slow, deep breath. Her spine straightened. The brilliant architect returned. I'm ready, she said. We pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and entered the hearing room. The room was tense. The municipal chairman sat at the head of the long table, flanked by 5 board members. Marcus Vance sat to the right, looking smug, a thick stack of printed papers resting on the polished wood. Miss Martin, the chairman said, his voice devoid of warmth. This formal hearing is highly irregular, as is the presence of your associate. He shot a dismissive look at me. Who is this individual? I am Gian Garcia, I announced, projecting my voice to command the space. I did not sit down. I walked directly to the center of the room, standing slightly behind and to the left of Faith, establishing a physical perimeter. I am Miss Martin's technical consultant. Vance scoffed loudly, leaning back in his leather chair. The only liability here is your client, Garcia. She oversaw an unethical bidding process, lied to this board, and I have the emails to prove it. Her firm is dead. The firm operates with absolute integrity. Faith interjected, her voice ringing out with crystal clarity. She stepped to the podium and connected her laptop to the room's primary display monitor. And I formally request that this board review the digital metadata of the submitted evidence. The board members turned their heads, watching her fearless posture. It's a distraction, Vance shouted, his face flushing red. The printed emails prove the corruption. Faith ignored him entirely. She opened the files on the massive screen. Notice the missing CAD routing hash, Faith directed, her voice commanding the room. Every single piece of correspondence my firm creates runs through a secure server that embeds a specific, trackable, digital watermark. These PDFs lack that watermark entirely. Furthermore, the embedded PDF producer string and font package mismatch prove these were generated yesterday on a standard consumer-grade word processor, not 2 years ago on my server. The chain of custody is completely broken. They are absolute forgeries. The room grew very still. The board members leaned forward, staring at the undeniable digital proof on the screen. Vance stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. She altered the files. She's lying to save her license. I stepped forward, moving smoothly away from Faith, drawing his aggressive focus entirely onto myself. She doesn't need to lie, I stated, my voice a low, heavy rumble that carried across the polished table. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out a simple manila folder. I did not slam it down. I placed it quietly and deliberately onto the table directly in front of the chairman. Those are public procurement records and corporate filings, I dictated, staring dead-eyed at Vance, stripping away his false authority. You hid a massive financial stake in the secondary landscaping firm that bid against Miss Martin. You fabricated a defect to force a structural fracture. You tried to break her firm to line your own pockets. Vance's face drained of all color. He looked at the folder, his hands beginning to shake. That is a severe ethics violation and gross fraud, I continued relentlessly, taking one slow step toward him. You have massive criminal exposure, Marcus. The district attorney will eat you alive over this. The hearing room fell into a cold, hard silence. There was no theatrical screaming. There was only the brutal reality of a man trapped by his own hubris. The chairman stared at the financial disclosures, his expression darkening with the sudden realization of severe political liability. He looked up at Vance. The chairman moves to dismiss this complaint and restore Miss Martin's provisional license pending the district attorney's review of these documents, the chairman said, his voice dangerously calm. Marcus, your voting rights are immediately suspended. Surrender your municipal credentials and leave this room. Vance didn't argue. He couldn't. He looked at the irrefutable data resting on the table. He slumped forward, his arrogant posture completely breaking. He stood up in silence, entirely defeated, and walked out of the hearing room without a single word. I turned my back on the empty chair. The structural integrity of Miss Martin's firm is verified, I announced softly to the silent board members. I turned and walked out of the room, Faith following close behind. 10 minutes later, we were standing in the quiet, carpeted hallway of the Civic Center. The defensive armor she had worn for a week was completely gone. She looked radiant and incredibly free. She walked slowly toward me. You crushed him, she said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. You walked into a room full of hostile politicians and took his entire trap apart. He assumed you were brittle, I corrected, my hands resting safely in my pockets to maintain discipline. He applied pressure, expecting you to shatter. He misread the structural weight in the room. He didn't know I had a master blacksmith standing behind me. She smiled, a brilliant, unguarded expression. The professional distance between us vanished entirely in the empty hallway. She reached out. She didn't shake my hand to offer formal, polite thanks. She placed her palm flat against the lapel of my dark suit, right over my chest. It was a deeply grounding contact that sent an uncalculated shockwave through my system. The board restored my license, she noted, her voice dropping its professional edge, replacing it with a quiet loyalty. My heart rate elevated, a sudden, powerful rhythm drumming heavily against my ribs. I looked down at her. The heat is off the metal. The space is yours. I told them the truth, Faith whispered, stepping a fraction of an inch closer. Her dark eyes locked fiercely onto mine. I told them that our temporary, strategic arrangement as consultant and client had officially concluded. I felt a sudden, sharp drop in my chest. The job was done. The perimeter was secure. It was time to return to the forge. And then, she continued, her thumb lightly tracing the expensive wool fabric of my suit, her breath hitching slightly, I formally asked if you were available for a real, entirely unmanaged dinner date tonight, without the armor, without the municipal strategy. Just us. I froze. My hands felt clumsy, slick with imaginary grease. I pulled my right hand from my pocket and nervously rubbed the back of my neck. The cynical, isolated detachment I had maintained in my dark forge for years was irrevocably fractured by her proximity. I am not accustomed to formal dining environments, Faith, I admitted. My voice a rough, quiet rumble, revealing a genuine crack in my armor. I am profoundly out of my element with this. I prefer a direct approach, she said softly, squeezing my lapel gently, anchoring me to the present moment, accepting the flaw completely. I looked at the fierce intelligence and warmth in her eyes. I didn't need a perfectly safe, heavily controlled perimeter anymore. I just needed reality. I lifted my right hand. I wrapped my calloused fingers gently over hers where it rested against my chest. I held her hand firmly against my racing heart. Then I accept the invitation, I replied. The end.